Namaste, Kellie Adkins here, founder and director of the Wisdom Method School of Yoga and the Wisdom Method Virtual Studio. So today I'd love to share with you some hot spots in the flow practice or just in our normal practice of asana that can actually create more structural destability, so destabilize the skeleton through repetitive motion. Some of these are also, some of the things I'll be sharing with you can also lead to repetitive stress injuries, which if left unattended can actually create injury patterns and potentially damage joints. So the good news is that you can identify these in yourself and you can stop doing them in your practice with the very simple tricks that I'm going to share with you right now. So we're going to start at the beginning, kind of with Surya Namaskar, the sun salutation. And I'm going to show you some points throughout this flowing sequence where we can actually put certain joints at risk because we're trying to achieve kind of a full pose look. Now, this doesn't mean that you can never do Surya Namaskar. In fact, what I'm saying is you should do Surya Namaskar and you can do all of this stuff. But before you move into kind of the full expression of some of these poses, it's really important to understand the mechanics of the posture so that you keep your body very stable and protected while you're building up the strength and flexibility to master this whole sequence. Okay, so first place that we're going to start is the big toes touching Tadasana. Okay. There are reasons why you may want to have your big toes touching and your ankle bones touching in Tadasana. So the reasons that you may want to do that, it decreases your base of support, so it encourages greater awareness in the deep core supports, the adductors, the pelvic floor, the core, right? All those are great. Reasons why you might not want to do this. Women's bodies, if you're a woman watching this, women's bodies, we have wider hips. When we bring the knees together, the ankle bones together in this way, it actually internally rotates the femurs. If you're hypermobile, it can create hyperextension in the knees, so which I'm demonstrating for you. That hyperextension pattern creates anterior tilt in the pelvis, which over time can result in shearing stress at the L5, S1, or lumbar region of the spine, right? So all that to say, if you're going to practice big toes touching and ankle bones touching, you need to be super aware of pulling up on the front line of the body here, right? So the front line, what we call kind of the extended core. So the quadriceps, the inner adductors, the pelvic floor, the superficial core, okay? Now, if you're just starting out as a yogi, or if this particular alignment doesn't work for your body, step the feet apart about 2 fist widths distance. And what you'll see is that now actually you've centered your heels directly below your sitting bones. You've created the container for actual neutral alignment at the hip joint, neither internal nor external. It's neutral alignment. And even if the psoas is a little tight, so the pelvis is in anterior tilt, you can accomplish a little bit more alignment with a little length through the lower back and a little drawing in through the lower belly. Okay, so that's kind of a Tadasana fix. So remember, I'm not saying never, ever, ever bring big toes and ankle bones to touch. I'm saying if you bring big toes and ankle bones to touch, be very aware that that can create this pattern, particularly in mobile bodies. So if you're a teacher teaching group classes and this is what you teach in your lineage, be very aware of watching your students' bodies in mountain pose. Because where we're going next is extended mountain. All right, so I'll show you kind of the injury or injurious way that a lot of people do extended mountain. So with big toes and ankle bones to touch, right, all in my patterns here, my pelvis is shifted, anteriorly tilted, my knees are locked, right? My teacher says reach up, take a back bend, and I do because it looks pretty, and I do that over and over again for the life of my practice, and before long I have chronic lower back pain. I may even injure the disc material between L2, L3, L3, L4, L4, L5, L5, S1, right? Very common injury patterns in yoga, very common injury patterns in the world, right? But particularly in yoga bodies, okay? So instead of that, if we look once more at stepping the feet wider, at having the pelvis act as this basin or base of support, and scoop the energy up with our inhale, and now from the center of the belly, begin the back bend, right? So I'm using a lot of glutes right now. I'm using a lot of deep core support. Notice it's not a quote unquote sexy back bend, but I'm still working my deep core stabilizers, and more importantly, I've created a very strong integrity at all of the core muscles. So not just the rectus abdominis, but the deep core supports like psoas, like quadratus lumborum, like erectors, like obliques, like transverse abdominis. So for this reason, in all wisdom method classes, we start with the feet a little apart. When we do extended mountain, it's a lift of the rib cage and an opening back. So I'll show you the whole posture. Feel free to do it with me if you'd like. When you're ready, weight through the heels. Inhale, reach the arms up. Create a lot of integrity through the glutes in the front of the core. Arch back. The base of the skull comes back just enough. Okay? Head returns to neutral, arms return to neutral. I have a strong integrity in the body, even though I'm taking my spine into extension. Okay, great. So next one, let's look at that shift from extended mountain to forward bend and then the lift up. Okay. So I'm just going to pretend that I'm back in my Ashtanga days and I'm big toes touching and I'm all in my patterns, right? And I go, oh yeah, big back bend and fold forward. Looks pretty, but can create a lot of injuries. So now what I want you to notice is that in this posture, actually my hips move back behind my heels. For a lot of yogis, that's the case. So instead, I'm suggesting bring the hips forward so that the sitting bones line up with the calcaneus, which is the weight-bearing bone in this posture. Then the fingertips drape directly beneath the shoulders so that now when I come up into Ardha Uttanasana, shoulders back and down, my neck does not come into full hyperextension. I'm not crunched up in the lower back, and I'm not damaging my lower back or knees. Then we come into Uttanasana with the chin tucking. Okay, so I'm going to go through that again, and I'll show you kind of not necessarily the wrong way, but the way that a lot of people do it. And again, this is not to bash any style of yoga. It's just to point out that certain movement patterns create very predictable injury patterns when practiced with certain postural patterns at the beginning. Okay? So beginners tend to have very predictable postural patterns. So say I have my big toes together, I reach up, I come into that back bend, and I fold forward. And my hips go way back behind my heels, and my teacher says, look up, and I do, and I crunch the back of my neck, and then I come down into forward bend, and my shoulders are still up around my ears, right? I haven't created any spinal length. Now, I may have gotten a nice stretch for my hamstrings, I may have gotten a little release for my lower back, but yoga is about the health of the spine, and I think all traditions can agree with that. Yoga is about the health of the spine, not the length of your hamstrings. So instead, we create a more functional movement pattern that creates structural integrity in the body by working the right muscle groups in the right pattern. So in a wisdom method class, instead of keeping the knees locked when we fold forward, we're actually going to soften a little bit. So it looks a little like this. Reach up, and again, lots of core integrity in the front of the body. Exhale as you lengthen forward, knees a little soft. This helps to release the back. Fingertips drape underneath where the shoulders would go, and I bring the hips forward. And now when I'm ready to inhale and lift halfway, I may straighten the knees by pressing the heels down. Notice that I create length through the back of the neck and a little cobra shape in the upper back. So this is my inhale. Ardha Uttanasana is intended to be a back bend. So inhale to lift, and then when we're ready, exhale to soften. Notice that my knees are still bent here. The chin tucks, and now I can use my abdominal locks to get a deeper release for the lower back as well as the hamstrings. When I'm ready to rise, pressing down through the heels, I let the back line of the body lift me. So pressing through the heels, I rise all the way up. So the difference between version A and version B is just that version A really uses the lower back kind of as a fulcrum. And while the lower back can be used like that, this actually is a pattern that can result in very predictable injuries over time. So version B, the way we do it in Wisdom Method Flow, actually creates more strength and integrity through the entire back line of the body and through the inner line of the body, which tends to be very weak on most of us. And when I say most of us, I mean most humans, right? Just from an anatomical perspective, we tend to be weaker here than we are here. Okay, so now we're going to go to everybody's favorite Chaturanga Dandasana. Okay. So I'm going to show you with knees down for just a moment, because some of us are at the point in our yoga career where we may already be doing Chaturanga Dandasana every day. Others of us might not be. So I just want to show you that you can do this in one way and you can do it in another way. And the first way that I'm going to show you is the way that I see so many yogis in flow, Ashtanga, power doing it over and over again. So this way is just dropping right down. Dropping right down, the elbows come way back behind the wrists. Okay, so I'll show you again, dropping way down. The other thing that tends to happen in this pattern is that the head kind of gets stuck because the tops of the shoulders want to crunch toward the ears. So the head gets a little stuck, it drops down sometimes. So you might also see something like this. Right? Or if they're doing the full pose, it might look something like this. We've all seen a chaturanga that looks like that. We may have all done a chaturanga that looks like that. So instead what I'm suggesting is, and I'll show you this way so that you really get a sense of what's happening, is that the hands obviously are going to stay fixed. But when we lower down through chaturanga, we're actually going to create a little lift through the chest as we pull the shoulders down and back. So there's a lift and an opening. There's a spaciousness in the front of the throat. And I do this throughout the low push-up, Now, the other thing that's happening is there's a tremendous amount of core engagement. So the front of the pelvis is lifting. The belly is drawing not just back, but kind of up a little, okay? So the difference between those two, version A, the one I already showed you, is that when I lower down, it's very much like this, right? Version B, when I lower down, it's very much like this, right? You can even see the difference from this angle. So version A and version B, right? You can see the difference, and I'll tell you, you can feel the difference. So a very common injury pattern for yogis who are on their hands is pain, either at the anterior shoulder or over time, pain in the entire shoulder girdle. This can translate down to the elbows and wrist, either side, contralateral side. If you have pain in the shoulder, you can have pain in the opposite elbow and wrist, or it can be same side. Pain in the shoulder can be pain in the same elbow and wrist. So this is a shoulder, elbow, and wrist saver. Right? I really recommend, if this is new to you, practicing with a mirror, filming yourself, or check out the other video that we have in the virtual studio, the Chaturanga Check, where you actually use blocks. All right, so second way to do Chaturanga version B, right? I'll just do it with knees down, and then I'll show you the difference with knees lifted as well. First and foremost, you need to be able to hold a strong plank. You can start with knees down. As long as you can hold a strong plank, you are strong enough, if you can access your core muscles, to do Chaturanga, right? The trick is in the physics. So now when you're ready, we're going to take an inhale, shift the weight slightly forward, and as you exhale, lower down. Notice that the neck stays open. Right now I just went all the way down, but I'm going to stop in just a moment and show you. Okay? We do not want the shoulders to move below the elbows. We want to stop when the shoulders get to elbow height. So again, we'll shift the weight forward, we'll bend the elbows and stop. Press back up, and we'll do that one more time, right? This is a strength building move. So we're going to shift the weight forward, We're gonna bend the elbows back and we'll stop when shoulders are at elbow height. You can also stop when shoulders are above elbow height. We just don't wanna go below. Great. So now full pose, right? So the difference between version A and B, version A is very crunchy. It's crunchy in the neck, it's crunchy in the lower back. It's terrible for the shoulders over time. And this is the one where actually the elbows move behind the wrists. In the version that I'm teaching you now, the elbows stay above the wrists throughout, and the shoulders stay in line with the elbows when you lower. Okay, so here we go. Full pose. From plank position, power up through the low belly. We're gonna take a slight shift forward, not so much that we're lifting up onto the toes, but enough that we can begin to create that shape. And then we're gonna lower down. We come all the way down to the floor from there. Now this is the next thing that yogis do, and I see this a lot and it hurts my heart and my lower back. From chaturanga, they press right up into this thing, which I'm gonna call some version of upward facing dog, right? So some version of upward facing dog. Notice that my neck is very uncomfortable. I'm not even gonna hold that, right? My hips are way back behind my hands and I'm not off my thighs. So while traditionally in flow classes, upward facing dog does come after chaturanga, what I've found in my work as a yoga therapist and therapeutic yoga teacher is that actually the best thing to do after chaturanga is to build strength and integrity in the upper back and to work the body in a very intelligent way into the opening required for upward facing dog. Upward facing dog is a very challenging pose. It's beautiful, it's liberating, it feels wonderful, but if you do not have hips between the hands and a beautiful open back bend and a free neck, you will injure yourself somewhere. Not the first time, but repetitively over time, 70 plus times in one Ashtanga class. How many times in a power or Vinyasa class? If you practice every day, that's a lot of upward facing dogs. It's a lot of potential for injury. So instead, after chaturanga, I suggest coming all the way down and experimenting with low cobra. Here's what I mean. So you've done your chaturanga. Now you're gonna come all the way down. You're gonna untuck the toes, press them evenly, roll the heads of the humeri back and squeeze the elbows in. And now dragging the hands isometrically, you're gonna lift the chest up for cobra pose. Keeping the glutes engaged, the pelvic floor engaged, and a lot of opening through the heart, you're still gonna get a beautiful back bend, right? So now learn how to bring the base of the skull back, open up the front line of the body, and breathe. The bonus with this posture is that not only are you opening up through the front line of the body, you're building a lot of strength and integrity through the upper arms, through the hips and glutes, and through the inner thighs. So that when your practice does progress to the capacity to hold upward dog without putting any of your joints at risk, upward facing dog then becomes a beautiful thing to experience. Okay, so the next thing I'm gonna show you is probably not everyone's favorite posture, but it's certainly a posture that I have actually seen progress in the yoga world. I love it, but there's so many different rules, different lineages that teach it different ways. So I'm gonna show you the way that we teach it now. So the next pose we're gonna look at is crescent lunge. And crescent lunge is one that we see a lot, we do a lot in a number of Vinyasa power classes. In the Ashtanga tradition, we do more Warrior One, and we'll go to Warrior One in just a moment too. But we'll start with crescent lunge because crescent lunge is one that I see particularly happening poorly for a lot of yogis. And what I mean by that is it's not creating the opening that it's intended to create. It's actually creating more injury patterns, and it's creating a lot more problems. So this is the reason why. First and foremost, we have to recognize that if we're teaching yoga to anyone in the developed world, that they've probably been sitting in a chair most of the day, which means that this region from here to here on most of those yogis is going to be short, right? Because we've been doing this all day. Now, if you are fortunate enough not to sit down all day, great, good for you. But in my work as yoga therapist, I have yet to find someone with a completely liberated psoas and a completely open front line of the body here. So the problem with that is if you come already with this tight area of your body and then you're asked to do back bends, what's going to happen is actually when you come into the back bend, you're not going to be opening the areas that need to be opened immediately. You're going to be opening different areas first. So this is what I see happening in crescent lunge. The other thing that happens is there are a lot of women practitioners in the yogic arts these days, which is wonderful. Yay for cosmic balance. But what tends to happen with women, we have more mobile skeletons. We actually are made that way, right? Women's pelvises have an obstetric function, which means the sacrum is broader, the ilium are farther apart, we have more mobility in this entire region, we go through hormonal fluctuations, everything changes. It's a good thing. What tends to be a bad thing is when you take a woman's pelvis and you pull the two halves of the pelvis away from one another using very strong muscular energy. Like, for example, the muscular energy in your thighs. Okay? So in crescent lunge and in warrior one, I see a lot of women practitioners really pulling and strengthening their thighs, but they're sacrificing the integrity at the pelvis, and they're sacrificing pelvic and core support for that. Now, this doesn't just extend to women yogis, it also extends to men yogis, to anyone practicing on the mat. So how do we do that? Also, how can we keep our front hip stable while we're trying to open and release the back thigh? So let's look at how to do that. So take one foot back, so you're in your crescent lunge shape. The thing that tends to happen in version A, right, the crescent lunge that I would like for everyone to stop doing, is the hip juts out to the side because this hip is not stable. This hip drops down, so automatically the pelvis is shifted, right, laterally. And then the arms go up and we puff the rib cage out and we compress the erectors and we come into like this extreme back bend shape, which feels really good for this region of my body, and that's about it. Right? If you ask me, how does my lower back feel? I'm going to tell you it hurts, right? And then over time, I'll come out of that now. Over time, what I'm going to start seeing is pain at my front hip on compression, because this hip is the weight-bearing hip primarily. And now I've asked this hip to do something without it being stable. So I'm creating shearing forces and strain at the actual joint site. So then when I come into hip flexion in another posture, I'm going to have pain at that hip that I can't figure out why it's there. The other thing that happens is contralateral SI issues. So if I'm a left-handed yogi, issues at the right SI. If I'm a right-handed yogi, issues at the left SI. This is not across the board, and you can certainly have pain at both of your SI joints. But this is what I tend to see as, I won't say cause, but precipitating factors for some of these injuries on the mat. So how do we address that? Let's look at version B of crescent lunge. So instead of letting my hips tilt to the side and drop out, I'm going to really focus on engaging through my gluteals. So I'm going to press through that front heel, I'm going to hug this hip in, and I'm actually going to bend my back knee. This makes the pose harder, actually. It's more challenging to balance. It's more challenging to do all of that. So you can even shorten your stance, and I really recommend doing this when you're first learning this version. Find your frontal hip points. Make sure they are aligned. This is misaligned, and this is aligned, right? Notice how much my back knee has to be bent in order to align that. Press my front heel to hug this in, even out through my front hip points, and now with a strong, stable base of support and a nice firm belly, length through the lower back, I can take my back bend shape by reaching the arms up and gazing up. Over time, once I've mastered the ability to strengthen through my front hip and to create liberation through this back thigh, then I can return to that extended leg, crescent lunge shape, right? So now, once I've learned how to stabilize my hip and open, I can straighten my back leg and I can come into a deeper back bend. Right? It just takes time. And we'll never learn how to do a structurally integrated pose if we're always learning how to destabilize our skeleton and postures. Okay, so those are the main things that I wanted to talk to you about today. Thank you so much. I hope this helps you in your practice. I know some of these little tips and tweaks might be a little different from what you're experiencing on the mat, so play around with them, stay playful. Thank you so much, and namaste.